I wanted to kind of touch on some stuff I didn't get to cover in class, just to show you how some programs like Unity handles assignment of variables and stuff like that. It's a lot easier than typing it out in text. So I'm going to start by showing how to make a script, and then we'll go from there. So in here, this is just like kind of a default layout of Unity. I have a couple of things in my scene. Game controller is just a blank one that we'll use to hold some of these scripts. And I have a scripts folder in my assets folder. So I'm going to right click down here in the project tab. I'm going to create C# script. You'll notice right away it creates a script and then it asks you to name it. I'm going to name this one example 5 using Pascal casing. And that means capital letter on the first word and all of their words as well, but no spaces. Once I have that, I'm going to accept it. I'm going to double click on it so we can bring up Visual Studio. It takes a second. And so now we're in Visual Studio. And so you'll notice that this is what is automatically populated. The name of our script's here. So keep in mind when you rename it in Unity, make sure you rename it here as well. Otherwise, it won't be able to tell what to look for. And so we're going to just add some variables that we talked about in class. In C# and Unity, we want to put the scope first usually. And when I say scope, it basically is another way of explaining whether or not other scripts can access the variables in this particular script. If it's private, only this script will be able to use it. But we're making what they call global variables, and it's going to be public so that other scripts can use it. I'm going to start off my line of code with public, which is the scope. And then I'm going to say the type of variable that it is. So we're going to do a float. And I'm going to call this one speed. I'm going to give it an initial value, a starting value of 1. And then I'm going to put a semicolon. And you'll notice right away that it doesn't ask for a decimal point. So that's kind of nice. But you could always put a decimal point there. Now I'm going to put a public and an integer. And we're going to call this one count. And we're going to say is. We're going to give it a initial value of 0. And I'm going to put semicolon. I do want to show you what happens when I try to, on an integer, put a decimal. So I'm going to put 0.0. You'll notice right away it gives me this squiggly line because it doesn't understand why you would ever put a decimal in an integer. So I'm going to take that off. Okay, so public, we're going to do a boolean, which in C# and Unity, it's just bool. And I'm going to say light on using camel casing. And so equal false because we're going to say the light is supposedly off. And end it with a semicolon. Next one, we're going to do public. And we're going to call it a string. And in C# and Unity, that's a lowercase s. And we're going to say message. So MSG, just message, short for message. And we're going to put in quotation marks. And you'll notice the color change. Hello. As an initial value. With a semicolon. The cool thing is, in Unity, since we'll be using so many objects and stuff that's on objects, such as what they call the transform, which is the thing that holds all the information about location and rotation and size, you can actually access all that information and then put it into its own variable to update it later. It's pretty neat. So as an example, I'm going to put public. I'm going to call it, we're going to say we're looking for a transform. So that component that tells where the positioning, rotation, and the size of the object is. And I didn't spell it right. And you'll notice the color change when I spell it correctly. And so I'm just going to call this the thing that moves. And I'm going to put a 1 there just in case we wanted to do a number 2 thing right after this, and we do. So I'm not actually going to give it any initial value because it's a little hard to do that outside of the start function. And we're actually going to set the initial value in the UI itself. So I'm just going to end that with a semicolon. I'm going to do another variable, and I'm going to do transform again. And we're just going to say it's another thing to move. So, or thing that moves. And we're going to say 2, and it with a semicolon. So there are ways that you can, in the start function, get the information that you need to put into variables. You can get the transform component and then say that's the thing that moves. However, what I'm going to show in this video, it's a little less complicated, and I'm going to show you how to do it visually and with clicking and dragging. Once we have our variables here, I'm going to save the file, and so that's going to tick off this asterisk here. I'm going to save, it's saved, so we're going to go back to Unity, and you'll notice right away that it's going to update. Yeah. Okay, so I want to put this in my game controller. So I'm going to select my game controller in my hierarchy. And again, it's empty, so you don't really see anything that's actually the game controller itself. And then I'm going to take the example5 script from my project file. I'm going to click and drag it over into the inspector tab, and it'll show up. One other way you could do that, I'm going to get rid of this so you can see it. I'm going to click on add component, and then if you scroll down, you'll see scripts. And these are the scripts that we made. Some of them are also built in. So example5 is the one I want. Once I click on that, it adds it that way. The cool things about Unity, and you'll notice this in other 3D game rendering type programs, is the fact that it automatically puts the variable names into friendly labels. And this is why it's important to use camel casing in your variable names, because it'll actually turn that all into something friendly with capital letters and spaces, and it's just so easier to understand. And then what you notice here is that you have number fields, and then you have a check box, and then a text field, and then this like kind of object fields, I guess you would call them. In speed, we made it a float, so you'll notice that I can't put in a letter like H. I can't do things like that because H is not a number. But I can put in 1.2, and it works fine. In count, it's an integer. So if I try to do 1.2 here, you'll notice it doesn't even allow for the decimal point to be entered. So keep that in mind. I'm going to put that back to 0. But also, if you hover your mouse in between or over the name of the variable, it turns into these arrows. That's for the number field. So you can click and drag, and it will, based on the type of number it is, increase and decrease as you move. Put that back down to 0. Put that back down to 1. And then light on was a Boolean, so on and off. And so you have on and you have off. Makes that really easy. And it's also great when you're trying to figure out if something is true. We'll cover that a little later, but when we're testing for true and false, these little checkboxes are amazing because it'll be a visual indication whether something is being true or false. And then you have your message here. You can type whatever you want in here. And this is the cool part about Unity and other programs, is a lot of times you can click and drag things, especially huge objects that have maybe their own components added on. So it looks like I'm looking for something with a transform in it. So I'm going to take one of these objects. All of these objects have a transform because Unity has transforms on all objects that are listed in the hierarchy. But I'm going to use this cube here. Once I click on it, you notice that there is a transform component. But I'm going to go back to game controller so I can have access to example5. Click and drag cube over into the area where it's empty field at the moment, and it updates. If I were to also, like say I had a bunch of objects and I had to go through them, I could search here, but there's also this nifty little bullseye where if I want to click on that to find my stuff, it will list everything of that form. So if I'm looking for something that has let's say a particular script on it, and then I want to find a variable, the variable type ends up being that script name, then I can click that bullseye arrow, that bullseye button, and it will bring up everything with that particular script. This is my list of things with a transform. So I'm going to click on Cube 2, double click, and it shows up there. So now I can use all of these as variables and objects down here. So in my code, if I were to update the code to update speed and update count, you'll notice it visually here in the UI. And then if you wanted to change the initial numbers, or if you're testing something midway through, you can test it right here in the UI versus having to do it directly through the text. And so I just wanted to show that as just another way that you may see variable assigning in a different format other than the text that we've been doing. I hope that helps, and I hope you have a great day.